Hey folks, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be talking about the boom of roster news that we got here on July 9th as the mid-2025 roster shuffle comes to a close. We're about to have our first big event of the second season of the year out at Cologne, and so, with the roster deadline of that event approaching, and events about to be underway again soon, we're kind of starting to see some of our final news that we're going to get about rosters changing or not changing. In some cases, that was news in itself that some people decided not to make any moves. And so we'll kind of run through just the plethora of news that we just got and kind of talk through some of these moves and keep it a little bit more short-winded this time around. But before we get into it, folks, if you don't mind, would you please subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already? We have been really growing this channel quite a lot this year. We've gained almost 1,000 new subscribers in 2025 alone, and we're very much approaching that 5,000 subscriber mark. And I think, it's more realistic than ever that we might actually finally get there. So if you don't mind, please jump in. Also, leave a like, leave a comment down below. All these things help the channel grow. But with that said, let's get into the huge amount of news that we got today. Now, just to kind of give a lay of the land right now with what the Counter-Strike rosters are looking like going into the second half of 2025, we obviously knew that Vitality weren't going to make any changes, right? I mean, they are the best team in the world by a large margin. They are perhaps one of the best teams we've ever seen in Counter-Strike history. They likely have their own era already established. The first one is CS2. Don't really need to go into that one too much. Then with Mousesports, I don't really think we're expecting any change with this team either. They were firmly number 2, I think, for this past season. Really, it was only Vitality who was able to defeat them on a consistent basis. And they had a couple of tussles with Falcons that didn't go their way, but they also beat Falcons a couple of times. They had beaten some of the other top 5 teams in the world on multiple occasions. They had some finals appearances. And yeah, they just lost all 7 of their matches to Vitality. And maybe some people thought to themselves that alone might be enough to trigger Mouse wanting to make an additional move just to see if that would be the next thing they needed to kick them over the edge to finally get one over on Vitality and finally, break that one-sided rivalry that we've been watching all year long. But I think realistically it makes sense for them to kind of keep things the way that they are, considering that they do have a ton of skill, that there's still more room for Brolin to develop as an in-game leader with his coach Sacrone. Maybe some of the other guys can also pick up some form or, add some new things to their game, and that may be enough. Or maybe something just happens where Vitality starts to take a hit on a map or two, and then you find some vulnerabilities that way where you kind of just eventually are able to beat them by outlasting them in a way, if that makes any sense. So obviously didn't expect that to really make any waves. And then Mongols also didn't really expect them to make any changes. I mean, they are playing well. They've had several breakthroughs lately. They broke through by being the first team from East Asia to make a major playoff whenever they did so at the Shanghai Major. And then at last Austin, they went all the way to the grand final against Vitality and finally were able to show that they could do it on the big stages with the big lights, with the big crowds in those stadium environments, and kind of shed off the studio merchant storyline that they have kind of had this year and the one that Mousesports suffered from a lot last year. And they really have a lot of good things going for them. They start an academy system to bring up new talent, so you didn't expect them to do anything. Then Spirit did make their move. I made a video on this, so go check it out about them bringing in Zwei for Magic, so you can go check that out. Now, Aurora is an interesting one because they did have their struggles. They were kind of battling for a top 5 spot. It was kind of them and Mongols because you essentially had Vitality number 1, Mouser number 2. You essentially had Falcons kind of at number 3 until they blew things to the Blast Austin Major, but I still think that they're probably a top 5 team realistically. Right now they're ranked 7th on HLTV, but I think realistically they should find themselves back into the top 5, probably over a team like Aurora, to be honest with you. And, I think Spirit has an opportunity to stay in the top 5 as well, obviously with the change that they have made. But this was a team that was kind of slipping off because they looked strong early in their year. It looked like Joda was a fantastic addition. It was one of the best moves of the offseason coming into 2025. Yeah, this team had its struggles, and you could tell they tried taking break. They, were trying whatever, and it just hasn't really panned out. So their players have kind of struggled, the latter half of this first season of 2025. But we saw them put out a tweet. So you can see here they tweeted out that we are not making any changes, and, they did this whole thing with the Turkish flags. Then after that, we already talked about Navi. Obviously, it doesn't show up here on the HLTV rankings, but JL getting benched, getting, Makaze from their academy team in was the only change that they decided to make. I did a whole video on this, so go check that one out as well. Falcons, we already talked about them in a previous video about Kiyosuke. Furious not making any changes. They basically just locked in Yakindar, and so they're keeping the same international roster. We've already talked about this team, so really no reason to go into that too much. And then you have a team like G2, where right now the speculation is that Snacks is on his way out. They're looking to pick up a new rifler. First was Kaspersky, then it was Mattis now, apparently from Fnatic, and Hunter will take over the IGLing role, which is kind of a natural progression for him. He was already calling their pistol rounds. He was calling their CT sides. He became an even more active voice of the team when Nico departed to go to Falcons. And so other than trying to lock in a new IGL, like if they would have tried to go after a Shuhei before he signed to Team Liquid, for example, or if they were trying to, bring up one of the young IGLs you're seeing on like a GamerLegion or Heroic or something along those lines. I'm not really sure, but other than that, I think Hunter taking over that role makes a lot of sense. Obviously, you got Heavy God, you got Malbs, you got Saul coming in as a new coach, you got Sun Pius coming in as a new opper, which is a pretty solid pickup, especially with the opping market the way that it is. And so we're just kind of waiting to see what G2's last signing is going to be. Again, it all signs went to Mattis from Fnatic, and maybe once that gets officially announced or something, I'll do a video about G2. But for right now, we're kind of where we're at. Hooksy did get signed to Astralis, so we know that's pretty much a done deal. Payne, after shuffling forever, seem to finally have their 5 firmly squared up and look sharp at the major. Look like they're finally finding their footing as well. We already did a video about VP bringing in Perfecto, and yeah, so a lot of the changes in most of the top teams we've already kind of discussed in other videos, or there's nothing happening really, but there were a few things that did pop up, and so let's talk through them. So the first one that I think caught a lot of people's attention, including myself, was the fact that FaZe have now just brought Broky back to the team after putting him on the bench for the last couple of months. So as you remember, FaZe obviously benched Broky after a stretch of a lot of struggles in 2025 as a team, and Broky individually as a player also really struggling in the opping role throughout the course of this year. And so in kind of a last-ditch effort to make some magic happen, at the major, they put him on the bench the last couple of months and brought in Simple, who stood in for the team at IM Dallas and the Blast Austin Major, in what was considered a Hail Mary move. And that was essentially a quote from Kerrigan himself, if I'm not mistaken. Now, obviously, there were a lot of people who were hoping that FaZe were going to lock in Simple for the rest of the year. That they were going to make that buyout from Navi, or maybe they would work something out to get it down, since his contract, I think, is supposed to be up with Navi at the end of this year, is what I'm kind of hearing. And so he will be a free agent. So Navi would likely want to get something rather than let him go on a free at the end of the year. And they don't seem to have any plans to bring him back to the starting lineup based on the roster news we heard from them recently, with them just bringing in Makaze and that being the only change according to the announcement that they made. So it was like, will they just get Simple? Because Simple did play pretty well at the major. Yes, he had a stinker in the playoffs in that quarterfinals match, but he played really good Counter-Strike in Stage 3 particularly. It just seemed like he was kind of leveling up through each rep he was kind of getting playing with this team between Dallas and the major. And I think there were certainly still some shortcomings in his game. He definitely looked like he was just struggling a little bit with like his timings and his movement, kind of running up against stuff, weird peaks, just wasn't fully ingrained, still could see some rust, but he was hitting some banger shots and he was making some big moments happen when his team needed it most to win some games. And overall, I thought looked good, and certainly looked good enough to where you could see hints of what could happen. You could kind of see that he was getting himself back into shape. And yes, you weren't going to say that he was back to being the GOAT that he once was from CSGO. Obviously, people like Ziwu and Munacy and Shiro and Torzi and, some of these other guys out there in the opping role are performing at a more consistent level because they've obviously been playing a hell of a lot longer, especially in CS2. Simple basically didn't really play this game other than a short stint with Falcons for the last couple of years. So it was to be expected that he wasn't going to be in full form, but I think we saw enough from him to see that it's possible. If he's willing to dedicate himself to making a full comeback to CS2, put in the hours, put in the practice, get more comfortable with the game, get more comfortable in a team environment on a team that he's going to be with long term, where he's invested, they're invested in him, so on and so forth, that could be very fruitful, that it could actually work out. And Simple may not be the GOAT that he once was, but he could still be a high-level player, and a team like FaZe can certainly use that, considering all the struggles that we have seen from them this year. But that apparently was not the case. It seemed like from the chatter that we saw that it was just not possible for FaZe to secure enough funding for the buyout, or not willing to spend the money, or maybe they don't have it. I don't really know what it is, but So Simple is gone to the bench. And when that happened, I really did think that FaZe might still try to make some sort of signing. I thought Dexter might be a solid person to look at just because he is still a young opera, in my opinion, who has a lot of potential. You know, yes, people will make critiques about his decision-making in certain situations and maybe a bit of his consistency, but the dude shows a lot of brilliance as well. When he was playing with Heroic last year, when he finally got his visa stuff sorted out and he wasn't having to sit out tournaments and he was able to play with Heroic full-time, kind of that, you know, latter half of 2024, he was playing at a very, very high level, in my opinion, and really helped propel that team forward to where they upset Navi and made the playoffs of the Shanghai Major. Then he moved over with the core to Falcons after they were supposedly going to bench him and bring in Sun Pius or something like that. But then they ultimately had the whole situation where the core of Heroic winds up joining Falcons. And, you know, he plays with Falcons then for a good portion of this first season. Obviously, the highlight of that being when they won the PGL Bucharest Studio event, and Dexter played very well, and that was like his farewell event. And I was thinking to myself, you know, if G2 aren't going to go after him in some sort of trade when they, you know, obviously sold Munacy to Falcons, Dexter's still sitting out there. I thought Dexter could be a guy for FaZe to look into, and then Kerrigan would be the perfect guy to work with him to try to help flesh out some of his, you know, issues and help polish him and make him an even better player. Like, that would be something I thought would be really cool. But apparently that's not going to happen. And in fact, I'm starting to grow more and more fear that we're just never going to hear from Dexter and he's going to wind up on some small team, because even a team like, you know, BetBoom, they decided to bring Art Frost in place of Zordy, apparently, even though someone like Dexter could have been a potential option for that. And obviously, Dexter's options are limited with him being Russian. Maybe he still might have visa issues if he was on a smaller name team. They didn't have the same resources to make sure that they got the, you know, right visas and the right timings and all that jazz. I'm not really sure if there's still something lingering there. But the fact that hasn't been any of the case, and the case is that they've brought back Broky, this is a wild one. And it's not because I don't think that Broky can't get back to being a high-level player, but for one, I think his dip in form has lasted a lot longer than people are really trying to claim it has. And two, it's like, what has magically changed in the last 2 months that's going to allow him to step back into this team and have the exact same roster that they were having issues with all year long, where they were never able to get to the level that they wanted to be at. And then they looked better when they brought in Simple, because they were actually able to make the playoffs of the Blast Austin Major. It's just like, what is changed? I mean, I get that, you know, allowing him to supposedly have a break and letting him come back recharged, refreshed, and readier than ever. That's just like PR speak, in my opinion. Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. And maybe Broky individually did benefit from having a break. Maybe it did allow him to focus on other things, just be able to get past some stress or other mental health issues or physical health issues, or just being able to kind of refocus himself. I'm sure a break can do wonders, but in my mind, the ideal scenario would have been Broky takes a break. He, you know, finds a new home. Like, maybe he could have gone to a GamerLegion before they picked up Kersey, as we'll talk about in a second. Or maybe, you know, he could have gone into a Heroic instead of Grix. Like, that was the type of team. Or maybe even goes to like Liquid. Maybe Broky could have been an option to replace Ultimate if you wanted to bring in someone more experienced in Ultimate or something like that. And Twist obviously worked with Broky before. Maybe that could have been a thing. I don't know. But the way I saw it was Broky would likely just benefit from a new environment. But to just bring him back into the same one that was having all the issues that it had. And yeah, everyone's had a break now. Everyone's had a recharge. Maybe there's some new built-up confidence from the success that they had to Major with Simple, with the rest of the roster, that maybe that gives them some hope or something like that. I don't know. Maybe it can be better. But I just don't see how things are going to be any different than what they were before. I thought they're going to face a lot of the same issues they were facing when they had this lineup. It clearly wasn't working. That's why they made the move that they did to bring in Simple to do the Hail Mary, you know, for the Major. And now it's just like they're going back to wasn't working. And it just doesn't look good. It doesn't feel good. I don't see how this is going to work out. It honestly just feels like they couldn't get Simple and they ran out of other options. And so the only real option that they had was to bring Broky back because he's already under contract and the team has to still compete. They still have to go out there and put a roster together and go out there and play. But I just don't think this is the ideal situation for any parties involved. And, you know, before people say like, oh yeah, Broky's had a bad year, he had a bad second half of 2024 as well. Go back and look. Really, one of the few times that he had a lot of impact was that playoff run at the Shanghai Major. Yeah, he played really well in those playoffs. But for a lot of the second half of 2024, when the FaZe team was having its struggles then, he was a part of that with his individual form. And it's come up yet again, Obviously this year, he was one of their weakest players, besides obviously Kerrigan, who's not known to be, an individual threat. He's more known for being the in-game leader. Obviously, Rain can have his dips as well. But yeah, especially considering he's in the opping role, such an important role, you notice it more. And so, yeah, this is a weird one for me. I don't really know what else to say. I think my friend Richard Lewis probably said it best in other videos that he's done, which is this.
Overwatch fart noise.
Overwatch fart noise, indeed. Now, in other news, a non-move that took place is the fact that Liquid makes no moves as far as their lineup goes of players coming into the second season. They had decided to keep Naf, despite his struggles, as are very well known. He has had the worst stint of his entire career in 2025. These last, 5 to 6 months have been incredibly rough for Naf. I mean, yeah, if you just look at this year, it is very clear that Naf has been struggling individually as a player. But the problem is that he has been so damn consistent in the past, is the thing. Like, you look at 2024, even when Liquid having their struggles, yeah, he had his off times, there's no doubt about it, but he was still a fairly strong player considering all that Liquid was dealing with in 2024. And then when you go past that, dip into the end of CSGO and just his entire time on this team in CSGO, he was incredible. I mean, you can just keep turning the page every single year. This guy is just looking good. I mean, he's just done it so long for this Liquid organization, going back to 2019. I mean, just so many years of consistent success out of this guy in his roles. And so to see him struggle this year has been very painful. And so with that said, I do hope that Naf can get back in form, because if he can, you do feel like on paper, this team has the pieces to succeed. If Naf can get back to his form in those extremity roles on the T side, in those CT positions that he plays, he can be a playmaker. He can be a fantastic mid to late round player in particular. He has the ability to find openings as well. He can play that edge role so well. Then you have Nertz. Nertz has also kind of had a struggle this year. I mean, he looked like a hot prospect on Heroic last year. And on this team, I feel like he's had to take a little bit more of a pure entry role as opposed to like more of just like a star space taker role, like a Nico. Like he's the guy that, could take, solo action at middle on Mirage or Ancient or something along those lines. But he's never really meant to be like just a pure raw entry fragger. I mean, in a lot of ways, Heroic really used Tessus to still kind of be that guy, or Kixon would go and do it. And yeah, Nertz was an aggressive guy and he would take a lot of opening tips on the T side, but he just wasn't like that pure entry rifle and executes. And so he's had to kind of take that up a lot more on this team, and maybe that adjustment has been a little bit tough for him, but Nertz is still definitely a guy who can light it up and be a fantastic star rifling player. Twist obviously giving up the in-game leadership, saw his individual form pop right back up. He can kind of be a guy who can get in the mix as a trader in your executes. He can play star CT positions. He obviously can be the other extremity player. So you got Naf and Twist on the edges. You got Shuhei and Nertz and Ultimate as your main control group. Like, this roster on paper makes a whole lot of sense. And then Shuhei, in the current market that we've got, I mean, this is a great in-game leader to lock in long term. And that's what Liquid have done, despite their ranking being well below what Shuhei's used to when he was playing with Esports. I mean, locking him in this way was really good. So the roster on paper looks really good, but it's just like it hasn't all come together yet. And so you have two options. Either you can try to make additional roster changes. Again, I thought Naf was kind of doomed. Even he basically thought that he was doomed and some of the stuff that he was saying. So I really thought that they were going to pull the trigger and maybe make a move here for Naf. Maybe they just realized they couldn't get another guy that made sense to them that would be a guaranteed better fit. Maybe Naf really was able to kind of take a break and refocus and he can come back stronger. I don't really know. I mean, that's a meme. Everyone always says come back stronger, but maybe it could possibly happen for him. Again, he hasn't had as long of a dip as some other players who have, found themselves in a rut. Like, this really is his first year where he's had this amount of struggles after so many years of being successful. And then Ultimate as an opper, I mean, he shows flashes of brilliance. The fact that he's aggressive and he's confident is nice. I mean, he definitely can have sequences with the op where he's hitting shots and looking awesome. Maybe Shuhei, with more time, can help develop him into a more consistent piece. Maybe they just need more time with this 5 and with Shuhei at the helm, because when they picked up Shuhei, they didn't really have a whole lot of time. They had to basically hit the ground immediately playing events, get prepared for a major, play that major. Obviously didn't go well. The pressure was really against them. They bombed out. Like, it was really bad. But they did bring in a new coach. This is, of course, Flashy, and so that was the big news that came out, was that they did sign Flashy as the new head coach of the team. Of course, Flashy is actually coming from Navi, working as an analyst under Blade for the last couple of years, and so definitely going to come in with a perspective from a legendary coach and a legendary system that Navi has had strategically, and I have no doubt that he's going to be very knowledgeable when it comes to tactics and strategy, but it's just going to be, how does he sync up with Shuhei as far as the direction of this team and how this team wants to play? How is he going to manage personalities? How is he going to deal with the player-manager side of being a coach as opposed to the tactical element of being a coach? That is really going to be the only thing that I foresee being a potential, trouble area. But I don't know enough about this guy to know how that's going to play out. But at least they do now have a head coach locked in, something they did not have, when they were embedding Shuhei and, trying to figure out the team, with the in-game leadership swap. So hopefully now that they have this new coach, they've had some time during this player break to rest, maybe get back together, maybe do some boot camping, maybe kind of, not overdo it though, because apparently that was one of the other weird things was that they came to the major saying that they were too tired from their boot camp. Like, I don't know, it's just weird shit at the major. It did not look good. It was very alarming, but maybe they have figured something out. But certainly was surprised to see them not make any moves. Then GamerLegion announced their move. They have brought in Kersey as their new opera after benching Slend. Again, I thought there was maybe a chance that they might go after a Grix, or they might try to go after a Broky while he was on the bench of FaZe, or maybe they went after a Dexter. Like, I really thought they might go some of these directions, but they have gone to Kersey, a guy who comes from the French team, playing for Gen 1, is the team he's most known for. And I admit that his numbers look pretty good competing in kind of that tier 2, tier 3 online environment. I also know that Ash is a guy who has an eye for talent and developing it and putting good teams together, even limited resources. Like, that's what he's been doing forever, and he's very good at it, and he's always done great work with this team. Their Wish ZWoo meme was actually one of the better announcement videos I've seen for assigning a new player, but I'm just not going to comment on this too much because I just don't know enough about Kersey as a player to know if he's going to be that much better than Slend, if he can rise up like Amaladoy did on Furia as a guy coming from obscurity and getting opportunity at this level, if he's able to live up to it or not. Time will tell, but I'll say this, they already do have a lot going for them. Ash, fantastic coach. Rez, really looking revived on this team and showing good individual form. The brain trust of Ash and CTR in-game leadership is great. PR looking like a real prospect in a rifling role. Towson's kind of been a bit hit or miss, if I'm honest, but other than that, the rest of the roster looks pretty good. They got to a pretty high level. I mean, they were basically a top 10 team by the end of the year. Yeah, they didn't play the major, and yeah, they did have kind of that rough outing. Yeah, just they went out dead last at Astana after doing well at Melbourne, but then they came back and did well at Dallas. So it seemed like they were on a pretty good trajectory. Top 8 at Bucharest into a 5th 6 and another 5th 6. Like, they were certainly kind of trending, towards that bottom end of the top 10, and maybe could make even more progress with this change. So we'll have to kind of see how it plays out, but cool for them. Then we had another signing here as JKS finally makes his return back to the Australian scene after 5 years on international lineups, obviously playing for teams like Complexity, G2, Team Liquid. Mostly Team Liquid is the one that you're probably going to remember the most out of that, as well as G2, obviously. But he is now returning home to FlyQuest to replace Liaz, and this is a great move for FlyQuest, obviously. I mean, they're in an interesting spot where they did bring in Netic, who seems like a, new, young, upcoming rifling prospect from the Aussie scene. They have Regali, who has been looking like an absolute stud for this team as an import opera from Europe for this team. And now you bring in someone like JKS, who is going to be a higher individual level player than Liaz, but can play a lot of the same roles, be that lurky guy, be that more passive force, be that clutcher, let Netic, and some of these other guys be maybe more the aggressive. Vexlight also can at times be a little bit aggressive, ends, taking over the in-game leadership again. Maybe JKS with his international experience can help kind of be like another voice on this team, or at least, somewhat bring them a little bit of something they didn't have. And yeah, we'll see how it plays out. I mean, for JKS, you do feel like this is probably the winding down of his career. He's already had his moment out there where he has played internationally, and he's had some success, right? Certainly with G2 in particular. And then when he had like the crazy stand-in moment with FaZe, where they were able to get a trophy as well in their own right. Obviously, I'm referring to IM Katowice 2022 when he had that stand-in situation, but also won a world final with G2, won a Katowice with G2, won a Cologne with G2. Had his moment certainly where he looked very strong internationally, particularly in 2022 and 2023. And prior to that that obviously was a guy who did a lot of good work with, Renegades and different Australian lines that he played for many years as he really grew out of that scene, went to the international stage, had some success, sure, but also, if we're being 100% honest, in 2025, he did have his dip with Team Liquid. And really, even through a lot of 2024, he had some dips here and there. Yeah, he had a couple of big events, but it just wasn't at the same level that he used to be, if we're honest. And I can't know all the particulars about JKS and Liquid. I'm sure there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that maybe would have led to him not performing as well as he was supposed to. I know there were times where he was taking on roles that he wasn't used to having to play, like playing Yard on Nuke, for example. So I'm not all doom and gloom about Grim as a player, but it's kind of nice to see him make a return. And it'll be really cool to see if this return back to FlyQuest, or back to the Australian scene in the form of playing for FlyQuest, will be an opportunity for him to have like one last chance at glory with, his country and his countrymen. And FlyQuest, they were having a little bit of something going for them here lately. We saw some, again, potential out of Nedic. We definitely saw Broky playing well. I think it's just going to be about how does Ends continue to develop as an in-game leader, what type of form is JKS going to be in after being out for a bit and, coming back and, getting up there in his career. But it's kind of a feel-good story. I think a lot of people are going to be happy about this, particularly the Aussie fan base, and wish them all the best of luck. And then finally, the last little bit of news we'll do here is that NIP is in advanced talks, apparently, to sign X-Kaspersky over from Ints. Now, X-Kaspersky was actually linked to G2 to be the rifler replacing Snacks, as Hunter was going to take over the in-game leadership. They obviously still have Malps and Heavy God. They obviously brought in Sun Pius as the opera, Saul as the coach. And so with Hunter being the IGL and Snacks coming out, X-Kaspersky was tied to be joining that team after, playing with NIP and looking very strong on this team. But now, supposedly, he will now be potentially going to NIP in place of Eridose. And I will say this, like when you watch NIP go on their online grind in 2025 and eventually build themselves up into qualifying for PGL Astana and actually turning some heads at Astana and looking very good, this team showed a lot of positive signs. For one, Shush is playing like career best Counter-Strike on this team. Playing his roles, but also playing more aggressively, actually doing some entering at times. It's kind of interesting to see him play that role because obviously on Heroic, he was more of a supportive element. And he still is kind of meant to be a supportive element on this team. He plays a lot of supportive positions, but he's one of their best players. I think he might be their best rated player through a lot of this year. So he's had a hell of a time. Wrinkle obviously still looks like this incredible hybrid player, super aggressive, like entering op on the T side. You don't see a lot of these out there. Like, he really is just super flashy, in your face, aggressive, can entry with the op on the T side, but also showed some good entry rifling on the T side as well. Obviously can be aggressive defensively and a very dynamic guy. I think Wrinkle's one for the future. Keep an eye on this Wrinkle guy. Like, he looks like he could be something for real. He's already shown some good hints of it. I think if he just continues on the trajectory that he's on, he is going to be a name we're going to be talking about a lot more, in my opinion. And then Snappy, obviously veteran IGL. And so that trio is looking really good. But the Portuguese players that had that brief stint with Saul last year, where they had a couple of events where they had some deep runs, and Eridose and EU Jerks were very much the catalyst for that as the star riflers of that team. But on this NIP team, they have absolutely been struggling, if I'm just being 100% real with you. I mean, when you look at this year, in these online events, it's just he has not been at the level that he used to be. And there were some games where I saw him play well at Astana, but there are also some big misses. And I mean, this is really like the biggest LAN that they played, if we're honest. But yeah, he just looked like he was kind of struggling, if we're being real. So, like, for example, he had a good map here against VP. He had a good series against G2. But all in all, really struggled at their first real big LAN. But he wasn't alone in struggling. Also struggling this year for NIP was EU Jerks. I know that they had kind of this weird situation where I think they used Jax as a stand-in due to some type of rule for VRS related situations, and so they had to play some events without their full five, and so maybe that was kind of a part of it, was just like some speed bumps on the way to kind of getting the team a little more solidified. But yeah, they just were really struggling individually, and Udrix was part of that. But we have seen him have a little bit of an uptick in online play recently. But he looked awful at Astana. I mean, I'm just going to be real with you. It was the Overwatch fart noise I played earlier as far as his performance. And as an entry rifler in general for this team, he has not been anywhere remotely near the level that he was on Saul that caught the attention of some teams, including this one, and ultimately saw him move into an international lineup. And maybe that's a part of it too. Maybe it is this the whole idea of playing international lineup, communicating in English, not communicating in Portuguese, being with your countrymen. I know that can be a tough transition, but he really was struggling. But again, his online form recently after Astana has had a bit of an uptick, and so maybe there's still something there. But I think that there is also a chance that he may get replaced at some point too if NIP really wants to see themselves raise the ceiling even more of where they're currently at. But that will be a story for the future. And so, folks, that's really going to do it. I mean, a lot of news basically all came out at once about a bunch of different roster moves or non-moves, which in itself was news for some teams. And so I just kind of wanted to talk through a lot of this. If any other big news stories comes out, I'll make some more videos about that. But other than that, we'll kind of start focusing back on actual competition here pretty soon with the second season of 2025 coming up real soon. And yeah, again, if you enjoy the content, please subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff, and I'll see you on the next one.